Well, let's talk about the problems with the military procurement system in this country and what might be done to make it better in the wake of the Norman case. Richard Shimooka is a senior fellow at the MacDonald-Laurier Institute. He joins me from Vancouver. Mr. Shimooka, thanks for taking time to speak with me today. It's good to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.
How accurate is Vice Admiral Norman's description of the military procurement process in this country as complicated, obtuse, and ultimately ugly?
I think it's bang on, and it's not really that surprising. If you look at the recent history, or even the history in the last 10 years, there have been consistent issues with defense procurement, and really his comments just underlie that.
What makes it so bad?
You see consistent delays with programs. It's not just with 1, 2, or 3 programs. It's almost any program above a certain dollar amount is basically has a delay attached to it, or has capability issues, or has cost issues. So, I mean, if I did a study where I examined other countries' procurement processes, and in reality, Canada is probably one of the worst in terms of delays and cost overruns with their programs.
How has the country suffered because of decisions based in many cases on politics and not on evidence? You've, as you said, you've recently written about this. Give me an example that shows us how broken the system is.
I think the fighter file is probably the worst example of this. Basically, you're watching a program that in 8 other countries that are part of the F-35 partnership, they basically all decided to go ahead with the purchase, are purchasing, or even have them in service. And they're doing it at a lower cost and at basically better industrial outcomes than the process that this government, the Liberal government, has kind of launched. So, I mean, that is probably the worst example in my mind. In other programs, you'll see similar sort of issues emerge with how various governments have kind of launched and managed programs.
Well, you talk about the fighter program. So how were Canadians poorly served by what happened there?
So it kind of requires a little bit going back into the history of the program. Canada joined the Joint Strike Fighter program as far back as 1997, and then they kind of engaged in the industrial benefit side in 2006. And that program has delivered approximately $1.35 billion US to Canada in terms of contracts. And as my report identified, Canada basically, this Liberal government in the competition format that they had tried putting forward would have not taken that into account and actually put at risk around 10,000 jobs within Canada that are supported by the F-35 program. This is, I mean, that part is really not well understood because of the nature of the program. It's not a normal kind of procurement process, but other countries to the letter who are part of the program all forego their national procurement programs to be part of this program. And nobody's had questions. In actuality, I think Denmark actually did an analysis, and they found that they were getting a third more industrial benefits and a higher quality of industrial benefits than they would have gotten through what would be termed a normal procurement process. That would be similar to what this government is actually trying to push forward.
So, how do we compare to other countries in terms of the political involvement of political masters in the procurement process here? Is it typically done that way, or is it left outside agencies, left to independent agencies to make these kinds of decisions, or does everybody have some degree of politics involved?
In the last 20 years, you've seen a movement to try to remove some of the procurement among Western countries. Specifically, Australia and the United Kingdom have actually put forward new processes that kind of depoliticize procurement. In the case of Australia, they actually have multi-party committees that work together to sort of have a consistent or a consensus-based policymaking that then is put into the procurement system, and therefore you don't have this sort of level of politicization involved. And that's seen as being relatively successful in their case. The UK's got a slightly different system, but it's certainly having some benefit in how they're kind of moving forward with procurements.
But these are typically massive spending projects with lots of jobs and economic benefits connected to them. Is there an argument to be made that politicians do need a say in the process to help boost the economies of various regions of the country, or to push the process along if it gets stalled, for instance, in the bureaucracy?
Certainly, that is an argument, and that is an argument that's typically been put forward. But I would argue that in the Canadian case, it's actually been to the significant detraction of our existing procurement policies, and that's really to to the sort of the negative benefit of Canada, right, as a whole, right, with the economic spending. Basically, if you have a lot of the industrial benefits program like we currently have, a lot of that money is just not well spent in terms of there's an opportunity cost is investment in these programs, which often aren't economically efficient, are basically they're just not delivering as well as they could.
All right, well, let's finish on this. What do you think the solution is? How do we build a better military procurement model?
I would suggest that basically, I think looking at maybe the British or the Australian model are ideas, and I think that Andrew Scheer has raised that in his recent policy platform. I'm not too sure if they are exactly effective. I think there's a lot of political differences between us and other countries. I think looking a bit at the structure within DND and with the other departments kind of will help there's a lot of sort of capacity issues within the government, and processes are being held up by multiple oversight bodies, which are not really shouldn't be involved in a procurement, or should have, let's say, a lesser stake because they have no real accountability in the process, and they're basically able to slow up the procurement system and increase costs. I think those are sort of questions. There's no one easy right answer. I think it's going to take a really large amount of work to be put together in order to effectively sort of reform the system to improve it so that it's better for Canadians.
All right, Richard Shimooka, thanks so much for your perspective today. Good to talk to you.
Thank you very much for having me.